Welcome to the RD2BE podcast. Each week we sit down with a different registered dietitian nutritionist to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the dietetics profession. Our aim is to dismantle the notion that there is a traditional career path. I'm Carl Barnes, the registered dietitian behind the scenes of RD2BE.
And I am Jenna Warnock, the RD2BE host. Our RD guests share their stories, career paths, and advice to help students like us succeed in the profession. Welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your host, Jenna, and we're actually doing a super exciting kind of two-parter regarding just EatWell Exchange, their nonprofit organization, because we featured Jasmine Westbrooks before, but this week we're sitting down with the other co-founder, Ashley Carter. And so, as I said before, she's the co-founder and director of EatWell Exchange, but she's also an adjunct professor at FAMU, which is Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, where she teaches the science of nutrition, which is just super exciting with all the things that she does. But Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah. And we're just super excited to dive into your path, but then also your side of EatWell Exchange. And whenever we were talking beforehand, you had quite a unique experience getting to that RD credential. And so kind of just with the first question, where did your dietetics journey begin?
My dietetics journey began originally the passion for nutrition came because of family issues. So my mom and dad both had diabetes when I was born, always navigate their diet and kind of modify their foods based off of their medical condition. So as a young girl, I didn't know about dietetics or being a registered dietitian, but I did always, I was very inquisitive about what they were eating and why they could eat certain foods and not eat other foods. And then I started my undergrad at Florida State. And that's when I think originally exercise science. And once I took a science of nutrition course, I fell in love. And I was like, this is so interesting. Science of nutrition to me was just so interesting because it really broke down food to the most basic level and how our body can utilize it. And that really sparked that interest for me to get into the field of dietetics.
Yeah, awesome. And I feel a common thing, just even with my peers, they're just oh, I wasn't nutrition at the beginning, but then I took that one class that they had to take that was nutrition related. And then they were just I was immediately hooked. And I think it's great how you just kind of have that double layer of you grew up knowing about it your entire life, but then you kind of solidified it back whenever you took that class at university, which was really great. And one thing that we kind of do want to dive a little bit deeper into is specifically how you went from graduating at university to the RD credential. And so you said kind of before the recording that you graduated in 2011, but then you didn't get your RD until 2019. So can you kind of just,
Yes.
A little bit deeper.
You heard the deep breath. And for anybody watching, you saw I just,
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me tell you. So I graduated with my bachelor's in 2011. In 2012, I was like, okay, I have this degree. What do I do with it? So I just started working. And then eventually, 2013, I decided to get my master's in public health. So I moved from Tallahassee to Tampa to go to University of South Florida. And then I met one of my friends who I went to Florida State with, Deidre. She was working for WIC at the time. And she's like, hey, why don't you come work for WIC? Because all you need is your bachelor's in dietetics. You don't have to be a dietitian yet. So I was like, okay, cool. So I started working for the WIC program. And then the same friend, Deidre, she's like, hey, aren't you going to become a registered dietitian? And I was like, I don't know, because I really didn't understand the process. Just being honest, when I did my undergrad, I really didn't understand what I had to do after. So I was a little confused on what to do. I applied for the internship the same time as her, and we both did not get in. And I was like, what? I'm so smart. I am doing all these great things. How come, why wouldn't they want me? That was my thought. And then I tried again the next year, applied for the internship, and we did not do matching. We did the Department of Health internship program. So I know not every state has that, but in Florida, we have it. And I applied again. I did not get in. So this time I'm devastated. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be a dietitian. And just remember, 2 years before this, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be an RD or not. But once you get denied, it makes you want something really, really bad. So then I was going to apply for the third time, but I met a lady named Dr. Gordon, who was working for the Department of Health. And I talked to her and I was like, hey, they're denying me for this internship. I don't know why they don't like me, that kind of thing. And she was like, well, send me your application. Let's go over it. And when she reviewed my application, she was like, Ashley, I really like you. Like, you're great, but I wouldn't accept you either. And I was like, what? So she was like, no, not being mean. She's like, but you just don't have a strong application. She's like, people only want to accept you into their program if there's a high chance of you being successful, to pass the RD exam, and also to go into the field of being a dietitian. And she's like, and based off your application, it's not really that strong. So to speed the story up, after that, I was like, okay, what do I do? She's like, go back to school, retake some classes, get some more experience under your belt. So that's what I did. So from that time, from 2013 to 2018, I spent that time retaking classes. I started volunteering. I started working with different organizations and just really getting experiences, taking more leadership roles too. That's another thing I didn't have. And even in my running group that I was a part of, I became a site leader. Side note, dietitian, running group, you're like, wait, what does that have to do with each other? But it's just showing that you're able to take a leadership role and also create something new as well. So I applied 2018, got into my internship, and then passed the RD exam on the first try. So everything is working. That's the long story short. I had tons of hiccups, but who I was in 2013 probably wouldn't have been as successful as I am right now. So I hope that's not anybody else's journey that's listening. But if you do have some hiccups, if you do get denied getting into an internship, if you do get denied for your master's, whatever you get denied for, just use it as an opportunity for growth and really work on yourself before trying again.
Yeah, and that's just such a great story that I feel like there's just like a couple of like nitpicks and things that I do want to like just kind of dive deeper into about, because that is such a great and like motivational story about if you want something, you can get it. Like that's for sure.
Definitely.
And so whenever, and it was Dr. Gordon, you said, that reviewed your
Yes, Dr. Leslie Gordon.
And so whenever she looked at your application and she said that it wasn't strong, do you remember what she said that made it not particularly a strong application?
My grades, number one, she said my grades were not that high. And then also I didn't really have a wide range in my application. It was pretty much just I graduated, I worked for WIC. And then that's when she really brought out to me. I was like, well, what do I do? Quit my job? She's like, no. When it comes to the dietetic internship, it's not about the jobs that you worked at, it's the experiences you had. She's like, go volunteer at the food bank. She's like, go to the dialysis center and volunteer. She's like, all you have to do is volunteer and learn things. In my head, I was just, when I did my application, I only put work experiences. But no, any experience you have will be a part of your application. So
Yeah,
that was another thing. And then also leadership roles. I really didn't have any leadership at that time. So it was just, again, I used my running group. I created a new site for that running club I was in, and I took a leadership role, and I was guiding 15 women twice a week on their run. So just kind of adding that to that leadership, improving my grades, and then also improving my experiences that I've had.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And like, as far as, because the timeline between graduating in 2011 and then getting the RD in 2019, like you have to have a lot of drive and a lot of like ambition towards that goal to kind of still keep going at it and still getting all those things. And so for you, what was the biggest motivator for you to not give up, especially after being denied, twice, and just kind of like having to retake all these classes, get involved with all these things? What kind of kept you going through all that?
That's such a good question. One thing that really kept me going is just seeing the state of my community. And what I mean by that, I said both of my parents had diabetes when I was growing up, and I saw that was very common where I lived in Miami. So I was just like, I can be the person to change this. And for me, it was just seeing that bigger picture and just knowing that it doesn't have to happen today. So that was my takeaway. It does not have to happen today. It can happen in 3 years and 5 years, but it's going to happen. That's what I reminded myself. Like, your community needs you. You have to be that one to go back and to teach people and to prevent these negative outcomes from happening. So for me, it was just removing that timeline that I originally placed on myself of being an RD after 2 years, and also just remembering the bigger picture. So outside of me reaching my goals, what am I doing? What's my purpose? And I think that purpose is what really kept me pushing through.
Yeah, and I think it's really great that, like, again, life purpose is just a big thing to think about, but it could just be the purpose of, for example, your purpose was just helping these people, having that bigger idea of just like, I'm going to become an RD and that's going to be what happens. And something that I'm kind of curious about is, like, given your path to becoming an RD, do you feel like how EatWell Exchange turned out and how your involvement, do you feel like that had a great impact and how you became a part of it, and just kind of diving a little bit deeper into where EatWell Exchange kind of integrated in part of your journey?
Definitely. So I feel like I am the person I am today because of those setbacks, honestly. So I feel like around that time, I had to learn a lot about myself and also how to work with people and how to communicate better and also how to lead. So remember, before my internship, I really didn't have, well, before my first couple of times applying, I didn't have leadership experience. And now, I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit. So pretty much what I mean by that is those life experiences help guide me to where I am today. And for Jasmine and I, it was actually three of us. So the other friend who kept pushing me to like apply for a WIC, she's actually the third co-founder of EatWell. So it was her, myself, and Jasmine. So we're friends. So us just having conversations about the field of dietetics, and also at that time, I think we were like three Black dietitians all trying to apply for the internship as well and not getting in. And then at that time, I don't think we knew the statistics because there's only 2.7% of dietitians are Black. So we didn't even know the like numbers then, but we did see a contrast. We did see that, we did not know any other dietitians that looked like us. So that also fueled us to start a business. So that way we can help communities that we're from, because, they're not seeing dietitians that can relate to them. So everything is connected, just the journey to get there. And then also knowing that we're needed out here and just taking those skills and those setbacks and turning them, like really transferring them into the skills that I needed to be successful for EatWell Exchange.
Yeah, and I think that's really great to highlight how, like, yeah, you wouldn't be where you are today if it wasn't for that long experience to becoming a registered dietitian. It's just really great how it has honestly probably, like, if we think about it, like, if you did do the dietetic internship with the experience that you had from the beginning, would you be the dietitian that you are today? And just kind of like, or doing the things that you're doing and being as impactful as you are today. And I think it's great to just kind of go a little bit deeper into EatWell Exchange and the mission that you guys had for, again, like representing those populations that didn't have access to nutrition, or just representing not only the populations that don't have access, but also dietitians as well, just kind of increasing that representation, which is so important. And so one thing that I really did want to cover and that EatWell Exchange does a great job on is, again, cultural competency and just having a huge emphasis on culture. And so I feel like, especially in like the dietetics curriculum, we are taught conventional nutrition education, where it's just kind of like you have your objectives, you have your outcomes, and you just follow it, you have activities, and then you just call it a day. Whereas I feel like there's a deeper level of that in culturally competent nutrition education. And so as far as making nutrition education more culturally competent, how does EatWell Exchange do that? So how do you guys emphasize cultural competency with your nutrition education?
Yes. So when it comes to culture, we intertwine culture into everything. So I remember in my undergrad having a class that focused on like culture and religion and something like that. But that was one class. So pretty much in that one class, we talked about food culture. We talked about different diets, whether it was, halal or kosher. We talked about all those different dietary patterns. And then that was it. We closed the book and you go to your other classes. But the way we see it is, if you're talking about sports nutrition, you have to talk about sports nutrition for every culture. If you're talking about somebody that has celiac disease, we need to talk about celiac disease for every culture. So pretty much cultural competency is not a book, it's not a class, it's not a course, it is a lifestyle. So whenever you're creating material for your business, you want to make sure that there's different color hands that are represented. If you're doing cooking videos, what type of seasonings and spices are you using? What cultural foods are you highlighting? We always want to make sure that it is a part of your normal pattern, and we're not just saying, oh, it's Black History Month, let's pull out some soul food. Like, no, it's Hispanic Heritage Month, let's go ahead and make, no, we don't want to do that. What we wanted to do is every single month, every single day, every program, plate, everything that you do is going to highlight other cultures, because to us, that's true inclusion, when we're built into programmings and not creating programs around people.
Yeah, and I think it's so great how you highlight, yeah, we don't just have Hispanic Heritage Month, boom, honor them for a month and then call it a day. We don't just have Black History Month. Yeah, no, just, yeah, it's not checking a box. It's definitely a lifestyle, and it's 365, and just how like we don't change our eating habits just for a month and then call it a day, which is, it's so great how EatWell Exchange highlights that. And so whenever you, Jasmine, and was her name Deidre, yes, okay. So you, Jasmine, and Deidre, whenever you guys formed EatWell Exchange, did you guys come in being like, we are going to be culturally competent and we are going to be cultural based, or like kind of whenever it came to you guys brainstorming EatWell Exchange and kind of forming the nonprofit, you mentioned a little bit how like you wanted to represent those underserved populations and you wanted to serve those underserved populations. And so whenever it came to the idea to focus on culture, where did that kind of come from in that mix and focus?
Yeah, so for us, it was just not really being able to find a lot of resources or ever finding our foods as foods that were highlighted as healthy. And another difference is that we noticed that my family's from Trinidad and Bahamas, so more like Caribbean, also being in South Florida. Jasmine's from Memphis, Tennessee. So her food is different than my food. So even though looking at us, we would identify as two Black women, the foods that we eat are completely different. So we notice that culture really dictates a lot of what we eat and what we do. And also, it's a huge barrier for a lot of communities, because if you're not teaching people about foods that they are familiar with, they're not going to change. If I have to wipe out everything that I like eating and start brand new, I'm not going to change. So when we started Eat Well, we knew that if we took somebody's cultural foods and we modified those foods to help them be healthier, they're going to change. So that was always like the foundation, providing nutrition education with a focus on culture.
And I think it's great how you use, yeah. Oh, sorry, but continue.
Sorry, I was going to say, but what we didn't plan for is the other elements. So we did not plan on doing gardening or sustainability programming. That was not a part of the original Eat Well plan. It was all nutrition education. But then as we noticed that more people needed access to food, and that, you know, that was a barrier, people not having food, but knowing those healthy foods, we were like, okay, we got to get people more food. And then as we help people get more food, they're like, oh, we don't know how to cook them. Then we started the culinary component. So that's what changed. It was always cultural foods, but it was how we were going to go about delivering the education that modified over the years.
Yeah, and like what's great is you kept on adding components that are still not as accessible or like weren't as emphasized in traditional nutrition education, and in these traditional formats you made it very much patient or client or population to education, and like a very like it was more so like a connection, like a physical connection, rather than here I'm going to tell you all these things, you do everything now, which is really, really great. And so for you personally, just with your time at EatWell Exchange, and you kind of talked about how it's progressed and kind of grown in this very unexpected but great way, are there any specific highlights or experiences that stick out throughout your time developing EatWell Exchange and kind of growing it and building it?
One of the things that sticks out to me the most is partnerships. So throughout the years, we've been able to partner with a lot of amazing organizations. A lot of them are different from us, whether it's personal trainers, whether it's the YMCA, Parks and Recreation, sororities and fraternities, and other organizations that we've worked with. And to us, that's what really to me, that's what really stands out. It's just being able to find another organization that has a different mission than you, but we still have that same connection of improving the lives of the people that we serve. So as an example, working with the Police Athletic League, their mission is to, you know, make sure that young kids have outlets. That way they're not, you know, getting into trouble. And that's, you may say, what does that have to do with Eat Well? If they're not properly nourished, we know what happens to us when we don't eat properly. We become hangry. The same happens for young kids. When kids are not being properly nourished at home, they go to school and they get in trouble. So even though we're not using the same approach that they're using because they focus more on athletic activities, we're like, hey, well, if we are able to provide these kids with a lunch, they're going to go home and study and do their homework and sleep better. So just having those partnerships really makes a huge impact.
Yeah, and it's a great just focus on collaboration and how, and we talked about this in Jasmine's episode where it was like a nonprofit or running an organization focused on helping people. It is never a one-person job, and it is never just like you can never do it with just one person like doing all these amazing things. And then whenever it comes to like those partnerships, how like for because like with what you said at face value, collaborating with that group and with helping those kids with physical activity, how did those partnerships kind of come to play? Did you guys reach out? Was it just like, oh, it just so happened? Like, how do those types of partnerships form?
Well, it was actually through a mutual friend. I was doing a culinary class for young guys at that park, and the police athletic league director at that time, he found out what we were doing. And he's like, oh, you're doing that for that group? Can you do that for us? And he's like, we do have 150 kids though. And I was like, done. So we had to divide the kids up into classrooms where some would cook and some would stay in the classroom and do activities. But overall, it got accomplished. So mainly for us, word of mouth, just us doing events for other people. And then also social media. We know that our Instagram following really helps connect us to people all around the world. And just putting ourselves out there too. So sometimes there has been organizations that have not reached out to us and we call them or we go to their programming and we volunteer a lot too. So we'll volunteer with an organization, get to know them and then say, hey, would you like for us to provide a nutrition education session for you? Or would you like a culinary program? Would you like a gardening class? And then that has allowed us to start new relationships too.
And I think it's great how you form those relationships by like kind of not integrating, but like being a part of their organization or just kind of seeing how they run and kind of servicing them before you guys form a partnership, which is really, really great. And it sounds like, because like you mentioned how EatWell, you started with like, the focus on culture, and then it's branched out to just like culinary classes, to nutrition education, to gardening, sustainability, so many different avenues. But has the vision of EatWell Exchange ever pivoted with these types of changes? And if not, like how have you been able to keep it consistent? So just kind of talking about the vision of EatWell, if it's changed at all and what it's looked like.
Well, the vision has stayed pretty consistent. For us, it's always just providing nutrition education with cultural foods and also that exchange component. So EatWell Exchange, the exchange is us not assuming that we know everything that's right and teaching everybody everything we know, but it's also learning from people as well. So we did take a mission trip to Haiti, and while we were there, we learned from them. We learned their cooking methods. We got into the kitchen and we saw the way they prepare foods as well. So for us, it's always been a part of our vision to just improve lower socioeconomic communities' health outcomes, and doing that by using cultural foods and learning from them along the way too.
I find it so great how you focused on why EatWell Exchange has exchange in the name, because you're exchanging, the education, the culinary classes, the knowledge, the skills, while you also gain more understanding about different cultures. That allows EatWell Exchange to be an even better and an even bigger organization, helping all those great people. And you mentioned a little bit like how definitely through like 2011 to 2019, how you were able to grow more skills like with leadership, organization, things like that, that allowed you to be the dietitian that you are today. But regarding like specific skill sets or things that you learned, what things transferred or what things really helped you with starting and running a nonprofit?
Well, number one would be organizational skills. So at that time, I was working for the Department of Health and I was in a supervisory role, and I really learned how to delegate and also how to organize my assignments. So I started just writing out checklists and then prioritizing what needed to be done. And that's what I did at work. And then fast forward now to EatWell, there's always a lot of things to do. There's some visionary things that Jazz and I think about, like writing books and creating curriculums and programs. And then there's meetings that need to be done right away. There's podcasts as well. There's all these things to do, and we always have to prioritize what's the most important. And then if we want to cut in between during my internship, that's the exact same thing I had to do as well. I had internship assignments. I had personal things going on in life. I had, the schooling that you have to do as well, our didactics. And I always had to prioritize what was the most important. So I would say those organizational skills and also leadership skills, which also ties in with communication. You have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn how to talk to people in a way where they understand you. And also for me, an area I had to work on was being more clear of what I needed, because I wanted to be nice. And I always felt like if I asked people for exactly what I wanted, I wasn't being nice. I was being, like kind of not rude, but just sometimes not seeming as as meek. So for me, I had to teach myself, like, Ashley, you can ask for exactly what you want and still be a nice person. And I'm sure somebody else listening can relate to that too, where we say, oh, well, just give it to me when you get a moment, or when you have time, can you send that over to me? And it's like, no, I need it by Friday. So now I learned to be very clear and tell people that I'm working with, like, hey, I'm excited to work with you. Please send everything over to me by Thursday evening. And that way, Friday morning, we can review it. And it's business. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
It's
No,
not me,
yeah,
you
no,
know.
precisely.
And then I noticed that the more direct that I became, the better results happened for me. So once I started telling people exactly what I needed, they were able to help me better. And this, of course, helped me throughout the internship, talking to my preceptors, saying like, hey, I don't really understand this. Can you take time this week to help me with it? Just putting this week and kind of holding them accountable. So that way it's not like, oh, well, one day I'll teach her, but no, I need to know that now. So that's my advice too, just learning how to properly communicate, saying what you need, being very direct, and also learning how other people communicate as well, whether it's, nonverbals, verbals, all those other type of communication methods. So that way you can be more effective. And the last skill that I'll throw out is networking. During my internship, my coordinator used to call me the networking queen because every time we would go to an event, I would always leave with like 3 contacts. And she would always say, Ashley, you're an intern. What are you doing? And I'm like, hey, I want to work with them when I become a dietitian. So I would always talk to people and say like, oh, I like what you're doing. You're doing a garden at the school. Well, once I become a dietitian, I would love to work with you. Actually, before I'm a dietitian, I can volunteer with you. And I would always do that. And what's funny is fast forwarding to now, I worked with most of my preceptors after completing my internship. So as an RD, I've actually went back and had partnerships with a lot of my preceptors and their jobs because I always put myself out there and I always maintain good relationships.
That's so great. And like for current students and I think it's great advice about like being more direct, asking, being straightforward with what you want. You can still be nice, you can still be respectful, and you can still get what you want in the process. But for like nutrition and dietetic students that may be like scared to do that, especially in a student role or in like I'm a subordinate, they're the like higher level that I need to respect. What advice would you give those people that might be a little nervous to reach out or to network or to kind of like poke their head out of the ground to kind of get out there more?
Practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. And I know that's like an old cliche saying, but it's true. When you're around your friends, try out different verbiage. And that's what I did. Like I would talk to my friends and I'll say, how does this sound? If I ask you to meet with me Friday and have this done before we meet, does that sound rude? And then, your friends can usually tell you, or even other peers you have, other interns you're with, practice on them. Say, when I say this, how does it sound to you? And that way you can learn how you're coming off aware. So I would say practice with other people. And when it comes to networking, really learn your elevator pitch. So be able to concisely tell somebody who you are, what you do, and what you need from them or how you can help them. And that way, when you're talking to people, you're not rambling on and on and on, and they're just looking at you like, okay, what did she say? What was her name? Like, no. Find a quick way to say, my name is Ashley. I'm a co-founder of EatWell Exchange. We teach communities how to eat healthier. of a program with shelter. We can work together one day. Maybe we can come out and do a cooking class. And that would be like a sample elevator pitch.
Yeah, and I think it's great how you focus on like, but like don't try to focus on like the nuance or like the big kind of fluffy big picture. Just kind of narrow it down to using your friends to help kind of bounce ideas off of, or like, you know, where it's more comfortable. It is the same concept with like EatWell Exchange and with cultural competencies. Like someone's more likely to make a change in their diet if they're familiar with it, just as it's more likely that you're going to make a change in your communication if you do it with someone that you're familiar with. And so it's the same kind of like, yeah, it's the same type of idea of just like kind of going into those harder things. It's easier to do whenever you kind of like take baby steps into it with people that you're comfortable with, because you're more likely to like get familiar with it and kind of comfortable stepping outside of your comfort zone. And then also like talking about the elevator pitch, whenever we're nervous, we always like to fill in words and we always like to say more than we probably need to say. But again, the practicing of like just narrowing it down to what's most important and to like that call to action as well, because we just learned about this in my class as well, where it's like, okay, you talked about all these things that you're doing. What are they going to do with that? Like, what's the networking? Like, what are you going to get out of that networking experience? Because like for you, it's like you can get it like through like volunteering through their gardening. And then, hey, maybe like, you know, as you're the RD with EatWell Exchange, start that gardening class and collaborate with them. Like it's definitely an action-based, what are we going to do with this? Instead of like, oh, it's great to know you, and then crickets. And so I think it's great.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's great how you emphasize like there is an action component for keeping it alive and for making a network relationship like worthwhile, which is really great. And yeah, so you spoke about just like the pathway to your dietetics career, the things you learned along the way, how this transformed into EatWell Exchange, how EatWell Exchange has expanded into what it is. But like for you personally, what would you say has been the most rewarding part of your dietetics career?
Oh, that's so hard. I would say there's a lot of elements. Of course, having my own business with EatWell Exchange is highly rewarding. But I do want to encourage people to know that before we started EatWell Exchange, I worked for the Department of Health for 10 years. So I don't want anyone to feel like you're not going to get your reward until you have your own business, because I was highly fulfilled working for the Department of Health. I loved the people that were coming in as far as the clients and being able to make a difference every single day. And then also I loved the staff that worked with me too. So being a supervisor there and just being able to move up was highly fulfilling for me. And of course, EatWell Exchange, it's the same fulfillment, honestly. Just being able to make that impact in someone's day, to be able to teach somebody and know that because I worked with them, it's a chance that they can live longer. The grandmothers that I talk to, it's a chance that now they're cooking healthier, so their grandkids are going to grow up and not have the same health conditions that they do. So for me, it's that impact. And the reason why I mentioned both scenarios is because I want people to feel that impact now. I don't want you to wait until you start your own business. I don't want to wait until you leave your job. Wherever you end up, wherever you land, you create an impact there. You do not wait until 20 years until, oh, well, this isn't what I want to do. That doesn't matter. If after your internship, if you end up working at a bank and you're not in the field at all, you make an impact at that bank by doing wellness programs. No matter where you land, you find a way to impact people and allow your passion, allow your purpose to shine through, no matter where you are.
That is such a great thing to highlight, just with like, you don't have to wait. It's the same concept of like happiness, where it's like, oh, once I get this, then I'm happy. Or like, once I do this, then I make an impact, or then I'm fulfilled. Whereas like for example, your process to becoming an RD, yes, you were able to make impact as an RD, but you were still making impact with that running club and those leadership positions. You were still leaving an impact in the experiences that you were building along the way. And that's just a great angle to view it as well, because I do feel like a lot of aspiring dietitians, they're like, I got to do this to check the box to get into this program, or I got to do this because my preceptor said so. Where it's like, yes, it's good to do those things. So like, boost up your resume, boost up your experience. But whenever you boil it down, you're doing it for the experience so that you can learn those skills and so that you can leave an impact. And I think it's a great mindset to have, especially in like just feeling burnt out and feeling like, oh, what I'm doing doesn't mean anything, it doesn't do anything. But when it's like with volunteering, that leaves an impact. Leadership roles, that leaves an impact. And it's like everywhere you go, whether you're a student or an RD, you are leaving a trace somewhere, which is just a really, really great reminder. And I'm so glad that you highlighted that. And another thing that I wanted to highlight as well, just because I mean, you brought a great light to like experiences, impact, things like that. But something that I'm curious about, that I also asked Jasmine, is EatWell Exchange was built off of the fact that there wasn't a lot of topic or conversation regarding cultural competency and nutrition, and how cultural knowledge just wasn't really focused whenever it came to nutrition interventions. And that's kind of what made you guys able to grow into your organization. But are there any other topics in dietetics that you wish more people focused on, or regarding culture, or just kind of like diving deeper into culture, or just anything in general?
I think it would be more of the fusion of culture with the different areas. So most of my dietetic career was with kids, pediatrics, and also women. So it's like we never fuse the two when it comes to the way children eat, and also cultural foods for young kids. The same when it comes to athletics. Like, we're not dietitians that are working with athletes. Are they highlighting foods from different cultures? Are they showing them portion sizes when they're not using a plate? Like, how are we integrating that? So for me, I think that's, I guess, an area that I feel is not really touched on to, that integration of the specialties in dietetics with culture as well.
Yeah, and I think it's great because, like, for example, I'm in my cultural foods class right now, but again, that's the only class that I'm taking that is focused on culture in my curriculum. And that's not to say that we're not talking about culture in our other classes, and it's really great to see that I have found, like, in my counseling class and in my MNT class, we are talking about culture more, which is very, very nice. Like, for example, we're looking at like the Mediterranean diet. And we talked about it a lot, where we're like, okay, what are some barriers to the Mediterranean diet? One big one is culture, and how lots of different cultures don't align with it. And okay, but but that doesn't mean that they can't have a healthy life just following the Mediterranean diet. And so it's really great to see that shift. But again, I very much agree how I feel like, especially in our like line of practice with dietetics, we talk about how MNT, I feel like, is just everywhere. I feel like that's more emphasized, where it's like, oh, you use MNT in counseling, you use it in sports, you use it in education, where it's like culture should have the same amount of weight, where it's like cultural competency in foods, that's in education, that's in sports, that's in everything as well. And so I think it's great how kind of the nuance of, it's not just emphasis on culture, but it's where culture is placed and where it's kind of integrated, which is it's a good nuance to kind of focus on, where it's not just cultural foods, it's culture and where it's at and how it impacts people's food choices, which is really great. And kind of going more into, because we've talked, again, like we've just covered a lot of great categories about cultural competency, just kind of your skills, what you've learned, advice, it kind of like shifting more towards just like overall advice, words of wisdoms, and things for our listeners that are pursuing the RD credential, is if there's any like just general advice that you would give to students aspiring to become a registered dietitian.
Okay, so when it comes to students aspiring to be a registered dietitian, the main advice I would give you is to not be so hard on yourself. I can tell you, not trying to date myself, but when I was pursuing my undergrad degree, Instagram, social media, all of that was not really a thing yet. So with that being said, I didn't have that constant comparison that a RD2BE does right now. So I always give them grace because of that, because I know how hard that is. I struggled in my undergrad to get good grades, So now as an undergrad student, you're struggling to get good grades and trying to start a business and try to run a social media page and become a nutrition influencer. And that's a lot. So I say give yourself grace and just remind yourself you don't have to do everything right now. And also you don't have to do everything at all. There's some areas we don't need to do. Everyone does not have to be an influencer. Everyone does not have to have their own private practice. Everyone doesn't have to start their own business. So just remind yourself that what is for you will be for you, but also to trust your journey. So whatever path you're in, whatever door is shut on you, find out why, and then do all you can to get through that door, whether it's through the door, through the window, climbing on the roof, whatever it takes. But just remind yourself that sometimes that door is shut on you for a reason. So just like I had to do, go back, retreat, find out what you need to do to make yourself better, and then try to knock again and see if it opens for you. And just remind yourself that, again, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to start a business right now. Just focus on completing your schooling, completing your internship, becoming a registered dietitian. And then after that, you're going to find your path. You may not know it right now, but you'll find your path, and then just make sure you continue to follow your purpose and your passion along the way.
Yeah, and those are such great words to end on, just kind of tying everything together and how it related back to your own personal story and just how it's gotten you to being where you are today with EatWell Exchange, impacting so many people. And again, the impact doesn't start once you have a business or once you're an RD. The impact does start now. And so thank you so much, Ashley, for sitting down to talk about your unique path, EatWell Exchange, and just overall great advice for people wanting to become an RD. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.